Hi guys. Tonight we're going to gently drift back in time to the warm golden sands of ancient Egypt and explore the life and legacy of Cleopatra. As you settle into your blankets, feel the weight of your body pressing softly into the surface beneath you. Imagine the air around you growing warm and still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of lotus blossoms and sun-drenched stone. We are traveling far away from the noise of the modern world, moving back through the centuries, layer by layer, until the glow of electric lights fades and is replaced by the soft, flickering amber of oil lamps and the silver reflection of the moon upon the great sea. Cleopatra. Her name has echoed through history like a soft bell ringing in a quiet hall. But tonight, we are not looking for the legends of Hollywood or the dramatic tales of poets. We are looking for the woman herself, a queen of immense wisdom, a daughter of the Nile, and a scholar who moved through the halls of power with the grace of a desert wind. Her story matters because she was a bridge between the old world and the new, between the ancient traditions of the pharaohs and the rising tide of the Mediterranean powers. She was a mind that sparkled like the stars over the Sahara, and a heart that beat in rhythm with the steady, eternal pulse of the river. Before Cleopatra was born, the land of Egypt was already ancient beyond reckoning. To the people of her time, the great pyramids were already thousands of years old, weathered by the winds and standing as silent, mountain-like sentinels of a forgotten age. The world was a tapestry of deep blues and dusty golds. The Ptolemaic dynasty, the line of kings and queens to which Cleopatra belonged, had ruled this land for nearly 3 centuries. They were descendants of Ptolemy I, a general of Alexander the Great, who had looked upon the black soil of the Nile and seen a kingdom worth more than any silver or gold. These rulers were Greek by blood, yet they had become part of the Egyptian landscape, like a vine that wraps itself around an ancient oak until the two become one. For generations, they had sat upon the throne in Alexandria, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, navigating the complex waters of a world that was constantly shifting, constantly changing. Imagine the blending of these two great cultures. In the marketplaces, you would hear the sharp, rhythmic sounds of Greek mingling with the deep, melodic flow of the Egyptian tongue. It was a world of synthesis. Marble statues carved with the fluid grace of Hellenistic art stood side by side with the heavy eternal granite carvings of the old gods Horus, with his falcon head, Isis with her protective wings. This was the atmosphere into which Cleopatra was born, a world of intellectual fire and ancient mystery, a place where the logic of the West met the deep, spiritual soul of the East. The city of Alexandria was the jewel of this world. It was a city built of white stone and light, perched on the edge of the Mediterranean like a dragonfly resting on a lily pad. To walk through its streets was to walk through the center of the human mind. The air was always salt-tinged, carried in by the gentle Mediterranean breeze that cooled the heat of the African sun. As we move deeper into our story, imagine the sun beginning to set over the harbor. The sky turns a deep, bruised purple, then a velvet indigo. The heat of the day radiates off the stone buildings in a soft, invisible wave, slowly cooling as the shadows lengthen. This is Alexandria at night. It is a place of quiet footsteps and the distant, rhythmic lap of waves against the limestone quays. The city does not sleep with a start. It exhales. The bustle of the merchants and the calls of the sailors fade into a low hum. In the royal quarter, the gardens are filled with the sound of water trickling from bronze fountains into marble basins. Drip, drip, dripper, steady, hypnotic pulse that mirrors the beating of a resting heart. The palm fronds overhead rustle with a sound like dry silk, whispering secrets to the stars. Standing tall above the harbor was the Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria. It was one of the wonders of the world, a massive tower of white masonry that reached toward the heavens. At its summit, a great fire burned through the night. Imagine that fire now a warm, steady glow, high above the world. The light from the Pharos was caught and cast out across the dark waters by massive, polished bronze mirrors. To a sailor far out at sea, that light was a star that had come down to earth to guide them home. It was a constant, flickering reassurance in the darkness. As you lie there, imagine that light sweeping slowly across the horizon, a rhythmic golden brushstroke against the velvet black of the night sky. The lighthouse didn't just warn of rocks. It beckoned the world to the shores of Egypt. It stood for the light of knowledge, the light of the mind that Cleopatra so cherished. The stone of the tower was cool to the touch at night, having held the sun's warmth all day, and now it stood silent, watching over the sleeping city with a majestic, quiet strength. Not far from the lighthouse, nestled within the palace complex, lay the great library of Alexandria. This was the heart of the city's intellect, a place where the knowledge of the entire known world was gathered. Inside, the air was different. It was still and dry, smelling of old papyrus, cedar wood, and the faint earthy scent of ink. Thousands upon thousands of scrolls rested on wooden shelves, each one containing the thoughts, the poems, the mathematics, and the star charts of 1,000 years. Cleopatra spent much of her youth here. She was a woman of many languages, a queen who could speak to the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Ethiopians, and the Greeks in their own tongues. Imagine her walking through these silent halls at night, the flame of her small oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. The only sound is the soft scuff of her leather sandals on the polished floor and the occasional dry rustle of a scroll being unfurled. In the library, time felt as though it had stopped. The voices of the past were alive in the ink, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood. It was a sanctuary of quiet, a place where the chaos of politics and the demands of the crown could be left at the door. Outside the library, the palace gardens were a labyrinth of sensory delights, muted by the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the heavy, sweet perfume of the blue lotus. These flowers would open their petals to the moon, exhaling a fragrance that was both earthy and ethereal. If you listen closely in the silence of our journey, you can hear the sounds of the Egyptian night. There is the distant, lonely cry of a night bird. There is the soft, rhythmic creak of a wooden boat tethered in the harbor, swaying with the tide. And always, underneath everything, there is the sound of the water, the Nile and the sea. The Nile brought the life-giving silt, the dark, rich earth that made Egypt a garden in the desert. The sea brought the world to Egypt's doorstep. At night, these two waters seem to converse in a language of ripples and sighs. The water is cool, dark, and deep. It flows with a weight and a purpose, moving toward the horizon without hurry. Without effort, Cleopatra would have looked out from her balcony over this vista. She would have seen the silver path of the moon reflecting on the great harbor, broken only by the silhouettes of the galleys and the fishing boats. The air on her skin would have been soft, like a veil of silk. Everything in this world moved at a slower pace. There were no clocks to tick away the seconds, only the slow passage of the stars across the sky and the rising and falling of the river with the seasons. Life was a circle, a repeating pattern of dawn and dusk. flood and harvest, breath and rest. As we drift further into the night, let your mind follow the river inland, away from the salt air of Alexandria and into the heart of the land. The Nile is a ribbon of life, a dark mirror reflecting the constellations. Along its banks, the tall papyrus reeds sway in the midnight breeze. She. It is the sound of the earth breathing. The mud of the banks is soft and cool. The hippopotamus and the crocodile rest in the shallows, their breaths slow and steady, blending with the lap of the water. The villages are quiet, the mud brick houses holding the last of the day's heat. Inside, families sleep on mats of woven straw, their dreams filled with the golden light of the sun and the green of the fields. Cleopatra knew this river. She traveled its length in a great golden barge, a floating palace that moved with the current. Imagine the sound of the oars dipping into the water plash. Drip, silence. The rhythm is steady, like a lullaby. The water parts for the bow of the boat and then closes behind it, leaving no scar, only a fading wake that ripples toward the reeds. On the barge, the queen would have been surrounded by the softest linens, bleached white by the sun and smelling of frankincense. The canopy overhead would be made of purple silk, snapping gently in the wind. As the boat glided past the ancient temples of Luxor and Karnak, the massive stone columns would rise up like giants in the moonlight, their hieroglyphs glowing faintly in the dark. There is a profound peace in realizing how much time has passed, and how the same moon that watches over you tonight watched over Cleopatra as she stood on her balcony in Alexandria. The world changes, empires rise and fall like the tides, but the stars remain the same. The constellations she tracked Orion, the Great Bear, the shimmering Pleiades are the same ones that wheel slowly above your head now. As the night deepens and the silver moon climbs higher over the silent city of Alexandria, we return to the palace of the Ptolemies, where the air is cool and the shadows are long and soft. The great library is still, the scrolls resting on their cedar shelves, and the lighthouse continue its steady, rhythmic pulsar heartbeat of golden light against the velvet dark. We are drifting back once more, moving through the layers of time, back to the very beginning of a life that would change the world. We are going back to the year 69 before the Common Era, to the birth of a princess named Cleopatra. Imagine a room deep within the royal palace, shielded from the heat of the sun by thick walls of white limestone. The floors are made of polished marble, so smooth they feel like still water beneath the feet. In the corners of the room, tall bronze lamps hold flickering wicks dipped in sweet olive oil, casting a warm amber glow that dances slowly across the walls. This is where the story begins, not with a crown or a battle, but with the quiet breath of a child in a cradle of woven reeds and fine linen. She was born into a world of ancient echoes. Her father was Ptolemy XII, a man who loved the sound of the flute and the complexity of music. They called him Orlitz, the flute player. In the quiet corridors of the palace, the faint, melodic notes of his music would often drift through the air, mingling with the scent of incense and the salt breeze from the sea. It was a home filled with the arts, with the soft strumming of lyres and the low murmur of scholars debating the mysteries of the stars. Life in the royal palace was a slow, deliberate dance of tradition and luxury. As a young girl, Cleopatra would have walked these halls, her small footsteps echoing softly on the stone. Imagine the palace as a city within a city, a labyrinth of quiet courtyards and hidden gardens where the only sound was the splash of a fountain or the rustle of a tame gazelle moving through the greenery. The walls were decorated with scenes of the gods, with her lapis lazuli wings spread wide in protection, and Osiris, the lord of the afterlife, standing eternal and calm. The colors were rich but muted by the dim light, deep terracotta reds, ochre yellows, and the shimmering blue of crushed malachite. Everything was designed to feel timeless, as if the palace itself were a temple dedicated to the continuity of the Nile. In the early mornings, before the sun had fully risen, the palace was a place of blue mist and cool shadows. Cleopatra would watch the servants moving silently, their white linen garments like ghosts in the half-light. They would carry silver basins of water scented with rose petals, and platters of honeyed figs and pomegranates that glowed like jewels in the dawn. There was no rush, no hurry. The world moved at the pace of the river, steady and sure. Her father Ptolemy was a man of many layers. Though he was a king, he found his greatest peace in the harmony of notes. He taught his daughter that there is a rhythm to all things, to music, to the seasons, and to the hearts of people. As she sat by his side, listening to the flute, she learned to listen to the silences between the notes. She learned that power is not always found in the loudness of a voice, but in the clarity of a thought. While other princesses might have been content with the finery of the court, Cleopatra's heart was drawn to the great library. It was her sanctuary, her quiet place of wonder. Imagine her as a young student, sitting at a low wooden desk, the light from a high, narrow window illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. She did not just learn, she absorbed. She was a child of immense curiosity, a mind that never felt full. While the city outside went about its business, she sat in the stillness of the library, surrounded by the wisdom of centuries. She studied philosophy, learning the thoughts of Plato and Aristotle, pondering the nature of justice, the soul, and the universe. The words on the papyrus were not just ink. They were voices from the past, whispering to her across the ages. Her education was a journey through the human experience. She studied mathematics, the language of the stars and the pyramids. She looked at the geometric patterns in the palace tiles and saw the underlying order of the world. She studied astronomy, learning the names of the constellations that guided the ships into the harbor. She knew that the stars were a map, a constant guide in a world that was often shifting, but it was languages that truly fascinated her. Most of her ancestors, the Greek kings who had ruled Egypt for 300 years, never bothered to learn the tongue of the people they governed. They spoke Greek, the language of the elite, and relied on translators. But Cleopatra was different. She had a gift for the music of speech. Imagine her practicing the sounds of different lands in the privacy of her rooms. She learned the guttural, rhythmic sounds of the Egyptians, the people who worked the black soil of the Nile. She learned the languages of the Ethiopians, the troglodytes, the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Syrians, the Medes, and the Parthians. To her, a language was a key that unlocked a person's soul. By learning their words, she could see the world through their eyes. Her tutors were wise men with grey beards and gentle voices. They would sit with her in the shaded porticos of the palace, where the air was cooled by the evaporation of water from the marble floors. They would speak slowly, their words trailing off into the quiet afternoon. "Look at the river, princess," they might say. "The Nile does not fight the desert. It flows through it, nourishing what it touches. To rule is to be like the water, to find the path of least resistance and turn the dry earth into a garden." She would listen, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes dark and thoughtful. She was learning the art of statecraft, not through iron and blood, but through understanding and diplomacy. She learned that a queen must be a bridge. She must belong to the old world and the new. She must be a daughter of the Greek intellect and a mother to the Egyptian spirit. The atmosphere of her upbringing was one of profound intellectual depth. It was a world of slow thoughts. There were no distractions, no screens, no frantic pace. A single idea could be explored for an entire afternoon as the shadows moved slowly across the sundial in the courtyard. The heat of the day encouraged stillness, and in that stillness her mind grew sharp and bright, like a blade tempered in a gentle fire. If you close your eyes now, you can almost smell the world she inhabited. It is the scent of the palace at night. There is the bass note of the nil-damp earth and green reeds. Over that is the sweetness of the gardens, jasmine, honey, and the citrus temps of lemon trees. And weaving through it all is the regal scent of kifi, the sacred incense of Egypt Kyph. I was a complex blend of 16 ingredients: honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, cinnamon, and bark. It was burned every evening as the sun set, a fragrant prayer to the gods. The smoke would curl into the air in thin, silver ribbons, filling the rooms with a heavy, relaxing aroma that seemed to slow the heart and clear the mind. Imagine the young Cleopatra drifting off to sleep as the scent of kifi filled her chambers. The walls would seem to glow with a soft inner light. The distant sound of the sea would provide a constant, low-frequency hum, a lullaby that had been sung since the beginning of time. She was safe, she was learned, and she was the pride of her father's house. Cleopatra was not a child of grand gestures. She was a child of quiet observation. She would sit on the low stone walls of the palace gardens and watch the insects in the grass. The way the light hit the wings of a dragonfly, or the way the ripples moved across the surface of a pond when a pebble was dropped. She noticed the details. She noticed the way the sun made the white stone of the lighthouse look like it was glowing from within. She noticed the way the wind changed direction just before a storm. She understood that the world is made of small things, and that to understand the whole, one must first understand the parts. This curiosity extended to the people around her. She watched the guards at their posts, the servants at their tasks, and the priests in their temples. She saw the hopes and fears in their eyes. She realized that even a queen is part of a larger tapestry, a single thread woven into the fabric of a nation. Her father, Ptolemy Auletes, watched her with a mixture of pride and melancholy. He knew the weight that would one day rest upon her shoulders. He knew that the world outside the palace walls was becoming restless. He would often take her to the high balconies of the palace and point toward the north. Across the great sea, there is a power rising there. "My daughter," he would whisper, his voice as soft as the rustle of the palms. "A city called Rome. They are a people of iron and law, and their shadow is growing long over the world. We must be wise. We must be like the willow that bends in the storm, rather than the oak that breaks." As the years passed, Cleopatra grew into a young woman of grace and profound intelligence. Her life was measured by the rising and falling of the Nile. The great flood would come each year, bringing life to the fields, and then the waters would recede, leaving behind the rich, black soil. This was the pulse of Egypt, a heartbeat that was thousands of years old. The silver moon of Alexandria, that ancient and constant witness, continues its slow, silent arc across the deep indigo sky. The city below is a landscape of shadows and soft, white light resting in the quiet embrace of the Mediterranean. As we settle deeper into the warmth of the night, we find ourselves returning once more to the halls of the Ptolemies. But the air has changed. The melodic, playful notes of the flute have faded into a profound and heavy silence. The time of the flute player has come to an end, and a new chapter, written in the quiet language of starlight and shifting sands, is beginning to unfold in the year 51 before the Common Era. The palace was draped in the stillness of transition. Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra's father, had passed into the eternal shadow, leaving behind a kingdom that breathed with a heavy heart. Imagine the palace at this moment not as a place of chaos, but as a place of immense, echoing quiet. The tall bronze lamps flicker with a lower flame, and the scent of Kifi incense is thicker now, drifting through the corridors like a physical weight, grounding the spirit in the reality of change. Cleopatra, now a young woman of 18 years, stood at the edge of a vast and lonely ocean of responsibility. Beside her stood her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a mere boy of 10. According to the ancient traditions of their line, they were to rule together, two stars orbiting the same center, two voices joined in a single song for the sake of Egypt. But the harmony of the palace was beginning to fray, like an old tapestry whose threads are pulled by an invisible hand. Imagine the coronation, not as a loud and boisterous event, but as a slow, ritualistic dance. The air in the great temple was cool and smelled of damp stone and ancient dust. The heavy gold of the double crown felt substantial on Cleopatra's brow, physical reminder of the thousands of years of history she now carried, as she sat upon the throne. The silence of the temple was profound. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic chanting of the priests, a low drone that vibrated in the floorboards and the very bones of the palace. Om, om, om. It was a sound that seemed to pull the listener deeper into the earth, deeper into the soul of the land. The relationship between the sister and the brother was like two different currents meeting in the Nile. Cleopatra, with her mind sharpened by the great library and her heart full of the languages of the world, sought to lead with the wisdom of a scholar. Her brother, still a child and surrounded by advisors who whispered in his ear like the dry rustle of desert vipers, saw the world through a different lens. In the quiet hours of the night, when the palace was at its stillest, the tension between them didn't manifest as shouting or anger. Instead, it was a coldness, a silence that stretched between their chambers like a frozen river. Imagine the long marble hallway that connected their wings of the palace. At night, the moonlight would hit the floor, creating a path of silver, but the air felt thin and sharp. The soft footsteps of the guards were the only heartbeat in that lonely space in Alexandria. Power was often a matter of whispers. The advisors to the young king moved through the shadows of the court with a predatory grace. They were men of politics and iron, and they saw in the brilliance of Cleopatra a threat to their own influence. They spoke to the boy king in low, soothing tones, planting seeds of doubt like small, dark stones in a garden. "She is too wise," they might have whispered, their voices barely louder than the wind in the palms. "She speaks the tongues of the foreigners. She looks to the stars, while the earth beneath your feet is yours alone." Cleopatra felt these whispers. She felt them in the way the courtiers averted their eyes when she passed. She felt them in the way the great library, once her sanctuary of absolute peace, now felt like a place of isolation. She would sit among the scrolls, the scent of old papyrus surrounding her, and realize that the knowledge she had gathered was a lonely treasure. The atmosphere of the city began to mirror the tension of the palace. The salt breeze from the sea felt a little more brisk, a little more biting. The light from the pharaoh's lighthouse, while still steady, seemed to cast longer, more jagged shadows against the limestone walls of the harbour. The world was waiting, holding its breath, as the sibling rulers drifted further and further apart. There comes a moment in every great story where the hero must leave the garden of their youth and enter the vast, unknown wilderness. For Cleopatra, this moment arrived not with a clash of swords, but with a quiet departure under the cover of a velvet night, realizing that the influence of her brothers, advisors, had turned the city against her. She chose to step away. Imagine her leaving the palace of her birth, her feet moving silently across the marble one last time. She carried little with her, perhaps a few precious scrolls, a vial of sacred oil, and the immense weight of her own thoughts. The journey away from Alexandria was a journey into the silence of the desert. As she traveled east toward the borders of Syria, the sounds of the sea and the bustling markets faded away, replaced by the immense, ringing stillness of the sands. The desert at night is a place of profound beauty and terrifying peace. The dunes stretch out like frozen waves of silver and shadow, their shapes changing slowly, imperceptibly with the breath of the wind. There are no buildings to block the view of the horizon, no walls to cage the mind. Here, the sky is not just a ceiling, it is an ocean of light. As Cleopatra moved through the desert, the rhythm of her life slowed even further. The pace of a caravan is the pace of the camel, steady, rhythmic, and patient. Thud, sway, thud, sway. The sound of the animal's hooves in the soft sand was a muffled, comforting pulse. The heat of the day would give way to a cooling twilight that turned the world a dusty rose. Then a deep violet, and finally a black, so pure it felt like silk against the skin. In the desert, the stars do not just twinkle, they hum. They are so bright and so numerous that they seem to exert a gentle pressure on the earth below. Cleopatra slept in a tent of heavy wool, the interior smelling of wood smoke and dried dates. Outside, the wind would pick up tiny grains of sand and brush them against the fabric. Hush, 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 the sound of the desert singing itself to sleep. In this exile, she was stripped of the finery of the palace, but she found a different kind of strength. She found the strength of the bedrock, the strength of the sun-baked stone that remains long after the river has changed its course. She was not a queen without a kingdom. She was a queen in waiting. She used the silence of the desert to think, to plan, and to listen. She listened to the nomadic tribes, speaking to them in their own tongues, learning the secrets of the sands and the hidden paths through the wilderness. She was gathering her power not in gold or iron, but in the loyalty of the people who lived on the edges of the world. Exile is often thought of as a time of sorrow, but for a mind like Cleopatra's, it was a time of refinement. In the stillness of the desert nights, the political games of Alexandria seemed small and distant, like the buzzing of gnats in a far-off field. She looked up at the same stars she had studied in the great library and realized that her destiny was not tied to a single building or a single city, but to the land itself. Imagine her sitting by a small campfire, the flames dancing in her dark eyes. The smoke curls up toward the Milky Way, a thin bridge between the earth and the heavens. The air is sharp and clean, carrying the scent of dry earth and distance. There is a profound sense of space, here space to breathe, space to dream, space to become dot. She was learning the lesson of the desert. That which is truly strong does not need to shout. The dunes do not argue with the wind. They move with it. The cactus does not beg for water. It waits for the rain with a quiet, patient dignity. Cleopatra became a creature of the desert, patient, watchful, and deeply, quietly determined. The tension with her brother was now 1,000 miles away, a ghost of a memory. But she knew that the river of time only flows in one direction. She knew that the silence of the exile would eventually have to end, and that she would have to return to the world of stone and water while she rested in the desert. The world beyond the horizon continued to churn. The shadow of Rome, of which her father had spoken in hushed tones, was growing longer. The great sea was no longer a barrier. It was a highway. In her quiet moments, Cleopatra thought of the Roman generals, men whose names were whispered like omens: Pompey, Caesar, Crassus. She knew that the fate of Egypt was being woven into a larger tapestry, one that spanned the entire Mediterranean. The isolation of the desert was a gift, a chance to gather her spirit before the storm arrived. She watched the horizon every evening, looking toward the west. She could almost feel the vibrations of the world changing. The silence of the sands was a blanket, but beneath it, the earth was humming with the coming of a new age. She was not afraid. Her education, her languages, and her time in the wilderness had prepared her for this. She was like a lioness in the tall grass, silent and still, waiting for the right moment to move. The desert, with its vast and cooling sands, has been a sanctuary of silence, but now the river calls once more. The stars that watched over Cleopatra in her exile now guide her back toward the salt spray of the Mediterranean and the white marble of Alexandria. As you settle deeper into your pillows, imagine the transition from the dry, herbal scent of the Syrian hills to the damp, fertile fragrance of the Nile Delta. We are moving with the Queen, drifting through the velvet curtains of the night, toward a meeting that would be whispered about for 2,000 years, a meeting not of steel and shouting, but of shadows, soft footsteps, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of a shared destiny. It is the year 48 before the Common Era. The city of Alexandria is a place of flickering torchlight and heavy tension, yet tonight we focus only on the quiet. The great harbor is a mirror of black glass, reflecting the steady, golden eye of the Pharos lighthouse. Somewhere in the darkness, a small boat glides through the water. There is no splashing, only the faint, rhythmic dip of a single oar. The boat moves like a ghost, slipping past the massive Roman galleys anchored in the bay, their hulls creaking softly like old trees in a forest. Cleopatra is on that boat, but she is hidden. She is returning to her city, not with a blare of trumpets, but with the subtle grace of a shadow moving across a wall. She knows that the palace is occupied by her brother's forces and the newly arrived Roman general, Julius Caesar. To enter openly would be impossible. To enter silently is her only path. Imagine, if you will, a large bundle of fabrica carpet, or perhaps a heavy linen sack used for transporting precious silks. It is thick, woven with the care of a master craftsman, smelling of cedarwood and the dry, sweet scent of a weaver's shop. Within this bundle, the Queen of Egypt lies still. Think of the patience required to remain so quiet. She is surrounded by the softness of the wool, the darkness of the weave. Her breath is slow and steady, a secret rhythm kept in the heart of the fabric. She is not afraid. She is a student of the silence. She has learned from the desert how to wait. She has learned from the library how to hold a thought until it is ripe. The boat reaches the palace quays. The stone is cool and wet with sea spray. A loyal friend, Apollodorus the Sicilian, lifts the bundle onto his shoulder. Imagine the sound of his sandals and the marble stairs scuff, click, scuff, click. It is a lonely, echoing sound in the vast, empty corridors of the royal quarter. The Roman guards stand at their posts, their armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. But they see only a merchant bringing a gift to the Roman general. They do not see the history that is being carried past them in the dark. The air in the palace is heavy with the scent of oil lamps and the old, familiar smell of limestone. As Apollodorus walks, the bundle sways gently, a rhythmic motion that feels like a cradle. They pass through the high, arched doorways, under the watchful eyes of the stone gods, moving deeper into the heart of the palace, toward the private chambers where the light of a single lamp burns. Julius Caesar sits at a heavy oak desk, surrounded by maps and scrolls. The room is large, but the darkness makes it feel intimate, a small island of golden light in a sea of shadow. The Roman is a man of many years and many battles, but tonight he is simply a scholar of power. His eyes tired from the flicker of the wick. The door opens with a soft, wooden groan. Apollodorus enters, his breath coming in steady heaves from the weight of his burden. He lays the bundle down on the polished floor. The sound is a soft, muffled thump against the marble. Imagine the silence that follows. The Roman general looks up, his quill paused mid-sentence. The only sound is the crackle of the lamp and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the sea against the palace walls. Apollodorus reaches down and begins to unfasten the cords. The fabric begins to unroll. It moves slowly, a heavy, spiraling motion across the floor. And there, emerging from the heart of the wool, like a pearl from an oyster, is Cleopatra. She does not rise with a start. She rises with the fluid, unhurried grace of a lotus blossom opening to the moon. Her white linen robes are creased from the journey, but she wears them with a dignity that fills the room. Her hair is dark, her eyes are bright with the reflection of the lamp, and her presence is a quiet, undeniable force. She stands before the most powerful man in the world, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. The air between them is thick with a new kind of energy, not the heat of conflict, but the cool, steady light of mutual recognition. Two minds, each shaped by the weight of history, have finally met in the stillness of an Alexandrian night. They begin to speak, but their voices are low, a gentle murmur that would not wake a sleeping child in the next room. Cleopatra does not need a translator. She speaks to Caesar in his own Latin, her voice carrying the melodic lilt of the Nile. She speaks of the stars, of the library, of the laws of her father, and the destiny of her people. Caesar listens. He has met many kings and many warriors, but he has never met a mind that moves with such speed and such elegance. He sees in her not just a queen, but a partner in the grand design of the world. The room feels smaller now, warmer. The shadows on the walls seem to lean in, listening to the soft exchange of ideas. Imagine the details of the room as they talk. The maps on the desk are caught in the amber glow of the lamp, their lines of red and black ink looking like veins on an ancient leaf. A bowl of grapes sits on a side table, their skins dusted with a fine, silver bloom. A carafe of wine reflects the flame, a tiny, dancing heart of crimson. The conversation flows like the river steady, deep and inevitable. They talk long into the night. As the moon moves past the high windows and the stars begin their slow descent toward the horizon, there is no rush. There is no urgency. In this room, time has slowed down to the pace of a heartbeat. This meeting is the beginning of a bridge. It is the moment when the ancient soul of Egypt reaches out to the rising strength of Rome. It is not an alliance of iron, but an alliance of intellect. As they talk, the tension that has gripped Alexandria for months begins to soften. Like wax near a flame, Cleopatra describes her vision for Egypt, a land of peace, where the library flourishes and the river is respected. Caesar describes his vision for the world, a structured, orderly empire where the law is the bedrock. They find the common ground between the two, a path through the darkness that leads toward a shared future. The atmosphere is one of profound calm. The world outside may be in turmoil, but here, in the circle of the lamplight, there is order. There is understanding. Cleopatra feels the weight of her exile falling away, replaced by the familiar weight of her own authority. She is no longer the girl in the desert. She is the queen in the palace, and the palace has recognized her. As you drift with the story, imagine the feeling of that room. The cool marble beneath the feet, the warmth of the oil lamp on the skin, the soft, rhythmic sound of two voices weaving a new history. It is a place of absolute safety, a sanctuary where the mind can be still and the spirit can be heard. Outside the chamber, the palace continues its slow, nocturnal breathing. The guards in the hallways have settled into a quiet vigil, their breathing steady and deep. The fountains in the courtyards continue their rhythmic drip, 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 a sound that has survived 1,000 queens and will survive 1,000 more. The scent of the night air comes in through the open balconies, the salt of the sea, the jasmine of the gardens, and the faint, earthy smell of the Nile. It is the same air that Cleopatra breathed as a child, the same air that her father, the flute player, loved. It is a constant, a reassurance that despite the changes in the world of men, the land remains the same. In the chamber, Caesar eventually sets down his quill. He looks at the young queen and sees the future. He sees a woman who can hold the weight of the double crown with grace, and a partner who can help him shape the destiny of the Mediterranean. The alliance is formed not with a signature or a seal, but with a quiet, shared understanding. The light of the lamp is burning low now. The oil is almost spent, and the wick is a small, glowing coal. The shadows have grown even longer, filling the corners of the room with a soft, protective darkness. The world is at its quietest, the moment just before the first hint of dawn touches the sky. Cleopatra prepares to rest. She is given a chamber of her own, a room filled with the scent of fresh linen and dried rose petals. As she lies down, the weight of the night feels like a warm blanket. The journey from the desert, the boat ride through the harbor, the hidden path through the palace, all of it is behind her now. She is home. The silence of the palace is different tonight. It is not the cold silence of tension, but the warm silence of resolution. The river continues to flow past the palace walls, a dark and powerful presence that carries the story of Egypt toward the sea. The Nile knows that its queen has returned. Imagine the sound of the wind in the papyrus columns. Hush, hush, hush. It is the sound of the land itself exhaling. The stars are beginning to fade, their light absorbed by the growing grey of the pre-dawn, but their work is done. They have guided her back to the center of her world. The dawn in Alexandria does not arrive with a shout, but with a soft, peach-colored glow that brushes against the white limestone of the palaces, turning the world into a dream of salt and light. As you settle into the stillness of your room, imagine the city waking up not to the clatter of chariot wheels, but to the rhythmic, comforting sounds of the morning, the distant call of a fisherman, the soft sweep of a broom on a marble courtyard, and the gentle lapping of the Mediterranean against the quay. We are entering a season of relative peace, a golden interval in the life of Cleopatra, where the sharp edges of politics are softened by the presence of a companion who matches her mind, spark for spark. In the quiet halls of the Ptolemies, the relationship between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar was not merely a meeting of two powerful figures. It was a conversation between two worlds. Imagine them in the early morning hours, sitting in a shaded portico that looks out over the great harbor. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp papyrus and the faint, sweet perfume of blooming acacias. Caesar, the veteran of 1,000 Roman sons, finds in the Queen of Egypt a clarity he has never known. They do not talk of conquest. They talk of the stars. They talk of the way the library organizes the thoughts of humanity. They talk of the Nile, that eternal, mysterious artery that gives life to the dust. In these moments, the palace feels less like a fortress and more like a sanctuary. The corridors are long and silent, lined with statues of gods whose eyes of lapis lazuli seem to watch the passage of time with a calm, unblinking grace. The light falls in slanted bars through high, narrow windows, illuminating the dust motes that drift like tiny, golden spirits in the air. This is the atmosphere of their Jnana world of slow thoughts, deep breaths, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of a shared intellectual journey. Life in the palace during Caesar's stay became a tapestry of sensory delights, muted by the dignity of the crown. Imagine the evenings when the heat of the day has finally retreated, leaving the stone floors cool and inviting. The queen and the Roman general walk through the private gardens, where the blue lotus flowers are beginning to close their petals for the night. The sound of their footsteps on the gravel is a soft, rhythmic crunch, 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 a grounding noise in the vastness of the twilight. They are surrounded by the scent of night-blooming jasmine, a fragrance so thick and sweet it feels like a physical embrace. Around them, the palace staff moves with the silence of shadows, ensuring that every lamp is trimmed and every fountain is flowing with a gentle, hypnotic trickle. Drip, pulse, drip. Caesar, who has spent so much of his life in the clatter of Roman forums and the mud of northern camps, is transformed by the elegance of Alexandria. He learns the Egyptian appreciation for the slow time. He watches the way Cleopatra handles the affairs of her kingdom, not with the blunt force of a legion, but with the precision of a scholar. She teaches him the songs of the Nile, the ancient hymns that have been sung since the time of the first pyramids. She shows him that power can be graceful, and that a queen can be both a ruler and a philosopher. In the great library, they spend hours together. Imagine the smell of the room, the dry, earthy scent of thousands of papyrus scrolls, the cedar wood of the shelves, and the faint metallic temps of ink. They sit at a low table, the light of a silver oil lamp casting a warm circle around them. Caesar studies the Egyptian calendar, marveling at its accuracy, its alignment with the heavens. They discuss the reorganization of time itself, a conversation that would eventually lead to the Julian calendar, a gift from the wisdom of Egypt to the structure of Rome to truly understand her kingdom. Cleopatra took Caesar on a journey that would remain etched in his mind like a carving in granite. They boarded the great royal barge, a vessel of gold and purple silk that looked like a fallen star floating upon the dark waters of the Nile. As you drift into your own rest, imagine the sensation of being on that boat. There is no engine, no Rawnley, the silent, powerful push of the current and the rhythmic creak of the wooden hull. The barge moves slowly, for the Nile is a river that does not like to be rushed. The shores pass by like a slow-motion dream, You see the emerald green of the riverbanks, where the tall palms sway in the breeze. And the white ibises stand like statues in the shallows. Beyond the green lies the eternal gold of the desert, a vast and silent horizon that reminds the traveler of the scale of time. At night, the barge becomes a floating palace of light. The reflections of the torches dance upon the water, breaking into 1,000 shimmering fragments as the boat glides past. Cleopatra and Caesar sit on the deck, wrapped in the finest linens, listening to the sounds of the Egyptian night. You can hear the distant lowing of cattle in a riverside village, the rhythmic splash of a fish jumping, and the deep, resonant croak of frogs in the reeds. It is a symphony of life, ancient and unchanging. They visit the great temples, Dendora Philae. Imagine walking through these massive stone structures by moonlight. The columns are so thick that 3 men could not clasp hands around them, and they are covered from floor to ceiling in hieroglyphs that tell the story of the gods. The air inside is cool and smells of incense and old stone. Caesar gazes up at the carvings of Cleopatra as Isis, her arms spread wide to protect the land, and he realizes that he is not just with a queen, but with a living symbol of an eternal culture. As the seasons turned and the Nile rose and fell in its predictable, life-giving cycle, a new life began to stir within the palace. The birth of a child is always a moment of profound quietude, a pause in the heartbeat of history. In the year 47 before the Common Era, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. They named him Ptolemy Caesar, but the people, with their love for diminutives, called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. Imagine the nursery in the royal palace. It is a room of soft shadows and white linen. The walls are painted with scenes of playful kittens and blooming lotuses, designed to soothe the eyes of a child. The air is kept cool by damp cloths hung over the windows, and the only sound is the rhythmic creak of a cradle, made of ebony and ivory. Cradle rock, Cleopatra. The queen, who could speak 9 languages and command the respect of Rome, found a new kind of silence in motherhood. Imagine her holding the child in the moonlight, his small, steady breath a tiny mirror of the river's flow. This child was the living bridge between the two. Greatest powers of the world, the blood of the pharaohs, and the blood of the Caesars flowing in a single vein. Caesarion. Single quote's arrival brought a new layer of softness to the palace. The Roman general, usually so focused on the maps of the world, found himself lingering in the nursery, watching the child sleep. In the quiet of the Egyptian night, the weight of the Roman Senate and the complexities of the Republic seemed very far away. There was only the child, the queen, and the timeless land. The atmosphere of Alexandria became one of celebration, but a celebration of the spirit. The priests in the temples offered prayers of thanks, their voices rising in a low, melodic chant that echoed through the stone halls. The people of the city brought offerings of flowers and honey to the palace gates, their gestures silent and respectful. Egypt felt whole, anchored by a line of succession that promised a future of harmony. Cleopatra moved through the palace with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just protecting her own throne. She was protecting the legacy of her son. Her intelligence, always sharp, became even more focused. She managed the grain stores, the trade routes, and the temple finances with a quiet efficiency that left Caesar in awe. She would sit in her study, the young Caesarion resting in a basket of reeds nearby, and dictate letters to her governors in distant provinces. Her voice was low and steady, a calming influence that reached the furthest corners of her kingdom. She was the mother of her child, and the mother of her country, and she wore both roles with a seamless, quiet grace. The palace gardens flourished under her care. She introduced new plants from her travels, creating a botanical paradise where the air was always fresh and the colors were always vibrant. Imagine walking through these gardens with the smell of crushed mint underfoot, the sight of brilliant blue water lilies in the ponds, and the sound of the wind whispering through the acacia leaves. Whisper, sigh, whisper, it was a time of deep light. The sun seemed to linger longer on the horizon, and the moon seemed to glow with a softer, more pearlescent radiance. The conflicts of the past, the war with her brother, the exile in the desert felt like memories from another life, smoothed over by the steady, healing hand of the present. But history is like the Nile. It does not stop for any one person, no matter how great. The world outside the palace walls was beginning to call to Caesar. Rome, with its marble temples and its restless senators, was waiting. The peace of Alexandria was a beautiful dream, but for Caesar, it was a dream he would eventually have to leave behind. As the great sun of Egypt sets behind the horizon, we move away from the warm, golden sands of the Nile and follow the silver path of the moon across the Great Sea. Tonight, our journey takes us to the heart of another world, a city of marble and stone that rises from 7 hills. We are traveling with Cleopatra to Rome. Imagine the gentle swaying of the royal galley, the rhythmic creak, creak, creak of the wooden hull as it cuts through the dark Mediterranean waves. The air is changing, losing the heavy scent of desert jasmine and taking on the crisp, sharp saltiness of the open water. In the year 46, before the Common Era, Cleopatra arrived in Rome not as a conquered subject, but as a queen of unparalleled light. She brought with her the young Caesarion and a retinue of scholars, flutists, and priests. Imagine the sight of her arrival, the Roman sun reflecting off the polished bronze of the ships, the white linen of the Egyptian robes fluttering like the wings of a dove in the breeze. Rome was a city of iron and law, a place of gravity and stern tradition, and into its center stepped a woman who carried the sun of the East in her eyes. She was housed in Caesar's private villa, a place of quiet gardens across the Tiber River. Here, away from the bustle of the Forum, the atmosphere was one of soft, filtered light and the constant, rhythmic sound of water flowing from stone fountains. The villa was a sanctuary of green in a city of grey. Imagine the scent of the Roman pines, sharp, clean, and earthy, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of Egyptian incense that followed the queen. Wherever she moved, Rome was a city that lived by the clock of the Senate, a place of loud voices and political shadows. But inside the walls of Cleopatra's villa, time slowed down. The Roman elite, dressed in their heavy wool togas, would come to visit the queen, and they found themselves stepping into a world they did not fully understand. Imagine the contrast. The Romans valued the solid, the heavy, and the practical. Their buildings were thick-walled, their laws were etched in bronze, and their speeches were long and thunderous. Cleopatra, however, brought the lightness of Alexandria. She spoke of the fluid patterns of the stars, the mystery of the rising Nile, and the philosophy of the Greeks. When the Roman senators sat in her presence, the air felt different. The rooms were filled with soft silk cushions and low tables made of citrus wood. The music was not the harsh blare of a Roman trumpet, but the delicate, liquid notes of a water organ or the gentle strumming of a lyre. Pluck, ring, silence. It was a world of sensory intelligence. Cleopatra moved through, Roman society like a swan through a pond of ducks. She was graceful, silent, and observant. She watched the way the Romans argued, the way they prioritized the state over the individual, and the way they feared anything they could not categorize. She did not fight them. She simply existed as a masterpiece of a different culture. She was a living reminder that there were ways of being that were older, deeper, and more colorful than the Roman way. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the Roman sun was at its fiercest, Cleopatra would retreat to the deepest shade of the villa's gardens. Here, the air was kept cool by the thick leaves of the laurel trees and the constant, hypnotic spray of the fountains. Imagine the sound of the water steady, white noise that drowned out the distant hum of the city. Splash, ripple, flow. She would sit with her scholars, their voices low and melodic, as they worked on the new calendar for Caesar. This was the true work of her stain, the parties or the politics, but the sharing of knowledge. They brought the solar year of Egypt to the lunar confusion of Rome. They were weaving the logic of the Nile into the fabric of the Republic. Caesar would visit her in the evenings, when the sky over the Tiber turned a deep, bruised purple. He would leave the weight of the Senate at the gates and enter the Queen's world. In these moments, they were not just rulers. They were two people who shared a vision of a world united by intellect rather than just by the sword. The light of the oil lamps in the villa was soft and warm, casting long, gentle shadows that seemed to dance in time with their conversation. The Romans looked on with a mixture of awe and suspicion. They saw the golden statue Caesar had placed in the temple of Venus Genatrix, a statue of Cleopatra herself. To the Romans, this was a startling act, a blending of the human and the divine. But to Cleopatra, it was a simple truth. She was the daughter of the sun, and her place was among the eternal. As the months turned into years, the atmosphere in Rome began to feel heavy, like the air before a summer storm. It wasn't a loud tension, but a quiet, persistent pressure. The shadows in the forum seemed to grow longer and sharper. The whispers in the corridors of the Senate became more frequent, like the dry rustle of dead leaves. Cleopatra felt this change in the air. She was a woman of the elements, and she knew when the wind was shifting. But she remained calm. Her life was anchored by the rhythmic needs of her son, Caesarion, and the steady work of her mind. She spent her nights looking at the Roman stars, which seemed colder and more distant than the stars of Egypt. She missed the scent of the river, the way the Nile would breathe a cool mist over Alexandria at midnight. In the villa, the routine remained peaceful. The morning walks in the garden, the afternoon study of the scrolls, the evening meals of honeyed wine and roasted nuts. Everything was done with a slow, deliberate grace. The Queen understood that peace is a practice, a choice made every day in the face of uncertainty. Imagine her walking through the villa at night, a single candle in her hand. The light catches the gold thread in her robes, making them shimmer like a distant galaxy. She passes the room where Caesarion sleeps, his breath a soft, steady pulse. She feels the weight of the Roman stone around her, so different from the limestone of her home. It is a city of earth, while hers was a city of water and light. History remembers the middle of March as a day of violence, but in the story of the soul, it was a day of profound, echoing silence. On the day that Caesar went to the Senate for the last time, the air in Rome was unusually still. The birds seemed to have stopped their singing, and the wind had died down to a faint, ghostly whisper. In the villa across the Tiber, the day began like any other. Cleopatra sat in the library, the the scent of cedar and old parchment surrounding her. She was reading a scroll on the geometry of the pyramids, her mind focused on the eternal truths of mathematics. The world outside was a distant murmur. When the news finally arrived, it didn't come as a shout. It came as a low, trembling voice at the door. The great Roman, the man who had bridged the world, had passed into the great shadow. The transition of power was not a loud crash, but a soft, sudden emptying of the air. Imagine the silence that fell over the villa. It was a silence so deep, it felt as though the heart of the world had skipped a beat. Cleopatra did not cry out. She did not wail. She sat very still, her hands resting on the papyrus scroll. She felt the sudden, cold weight of reality. The bridge she had built with Caesar had not collapsed. It had simply become a path she would now have to walk alone. The following days in Rome were a blur of grey light and hushed voices. The city was holding its breath, unsure of what the new dawn would bring. The streets were quiet, the shops closed, the people waiting. Inside the villa, the preparation for departure began. It was a slow, methodical process. The scrolls were packed into their leather cases. The fine linens were folded. The gold vessels were wrapped in soft wool. Cleopatra knew that her time in Rome had ended. The city was no longer a place of alliance. It was a place of ghosts. She needed the river. She needed the salt air of the harbor. She needed the familiar, rhythmic pulse of the Nile to heal the stillness of her heart. The departure from Rome was as quiet as her arrival had been grand. Under the cover of a cool, misty dawn, the Egyptian retinue moved toward the coast. The sound of the horses' hooves on the stone road was a muffled clop, 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 a steady beat that signaled the beginning of the journey home. As they reached the sea and boarded the ships, the atmosphere began to lift. The Roman stone was left behind, replaced by the endless, shifting blue of the Mediterranean. Imagine the feeling of the boat as it leaves the harbor, the first true surge of the waves beneath the hull. The way the wind catches the sails and pulls the ship toward the horizon dot. Cleopatra stood at the stern of the galley, watching the coast of Italy fade into a thin, grey line. She felt the tension of the last few years beginning to dissolve in the salt air. The sea is a great healer. Its vastness makes the troubles of men seem small and fleeting. The rhythmic sound of the waves, hiss, crash, sigh was a lullaby that promised a return to the source. The journey back to Egypt was a long, slow meditation. The queen spent her days on the deck, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. She was moving away from the world of iron and toward the world of light. As the ships neared the coast of Africa, the air began to warm. The smell of the sea changed, taking on that unique earthy fragrance that can only be found where the desert meets the water. It is the smell of sun-baked silt, of dried reeds, and of ancient, eternal heat. The Roman stars have faded into the warm, honeyed light of the Egyptian dawn, and the city of Rome is now a distant, marble memory. We return to the Queen, who stands once again upon the limestone terraces of Alexandria, her eyes fixed not on the past, but on the shimmering horizon of the great sea. As you settle into the stillness of this moment, feel the cool, salt-tinged breeze brushing against your skin, and listen to the rhythmic, hypnotic pulse of the Mediterranean. We are entering a season of deep indigo nights and golden afternoons, a time when the fate of the world would be woven into a tapestry of silken sails and starlit banquets. It is the year 41 before the Common Era. The world is once again shifting its weight. In the wake of Caesar's passing, new names echo through the corridors of power. And one name, in particular, carries the thunder of the Roman legions, Mark Antony. He is a man of the earth, a soldier of immense vitality, and he has summoned the Queen of Egypt to meet him in Tarsus. But Cleopatra does not move with the haste of a subject. She moves with the deliberate, graceful gravity of a celestial body. Imagine the journey to that meeting not as a military march, but as a sensory masterpiece. Cleopatra boarded her royal galley, a vessel that seemed to have been birthed from the very dreams of the Nile. The hull was plated in beaten gold, reflecting the sun with such intensity that it looked like a flame moving across the water. The oars were made of silver, and as they dipped into the sea splash, drip, ripple, they moved in perfect, rhythmic harmony to the music of flutes and harps. The sails were of deep Tyrian purple, a color so rich it looked like a piece of the midnight sky had been captured and held by the wind. The scent of the ship preceded it for miles a heavy, intoxicating cloud of frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon that drifted over the waves, signaling to all who smelled it that the soul of the East was approaching. When the golden galley reached the Kidnus River, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mark Antony sat upon his tribunal in the city square, surrounded by the iron and bronze of his legions. But as the scent of the Queen's ship filled the air, the people began to leave the square, drawn toward the riverbank by a beauty they had never dared to imagine. Imagine Antony sitting alone as the music of the flutes grew louder, a soft, melodic invitation. He walked toward the river and saw not a queen, but the goddess Aphrodite herself, reclining beneath a canopy of gold cloth. She was surrounded by beautiful children dressed as cupids, fanning her with slow, rhythmic strokes of their feathered fans. Whoosh, sigh, whoosh. The meeting was not a clash of wills, but a quiet surrender to the senses. Antony, a man who lived by the sword, found himself disarmed by the elegance of the mind. Cleopatra spoke to him, her voice a low, resonant instrument that carried the wisdom of the library and the mystery of the river. She did not ask for his protection. She invited him into her world. That night she hosted a banquet that redefined the meaning of light. She ordered the entire ship to be hung with hundreds of branches of oil lamps, arranged in geometric patterns that mirrored the constellations. The light was so bright it seemed to push back the darkness of the world, creating a private universe of warmth and gold. Antony, used to the austerity of a soldier's camp, felt as though he had stepped into a dream. In the quiet of that evening, a partnership was formed, a bond that was not just political, but a meeting of two souls who sought a life larger than the one they had been given. Antony followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria, leaving behind the grey tensions of the Roman Republic for the vibrant, living heart of Egypt. Together, they formed a secret society they called the Inimitable Livers. It sounds grand, but at its heart, it was a commitment to the slow time, to the appreciation of the present moment. Imagine their life in the palace. They did not spend their days in constant ceremony. Instead, they sought the quiet pleasures of the city. In the middle of the night, they would dress in the simple clothes of common citizens and wander through the streets of Alexandria. The city at night was a different world. The white stone of the buildings held the ghost of the day's heat, and the air was filled with the smell of roasting chickpeas, sea salt, and the damp earth of the canals. They would walk hand in hand, listening to the rhythmic snoring of the sleeping city, the distant sound of a guard's spear clinking against stone, and the soft, constant lap of the water. They were looking for the hidden music of life. They would sit on the edge of the harbour, their feet dangling over the water, and watch the moon reflect in the great sea. In those moments, they were not a queen and a general. They were two people finding solace in the silence. The scale of their power was immense, but the scale of their happiness was found in the small things: a shared laugh, the scent of the blue lotus, the way the stars seemed to pulse in time with the river. The winter in Alexandria is soft and mild. The air is never cold, only crisp and clear, like a glass of spring water. During these months, the palace gardens became a labyrinth of shadows and scents. Cleopatra and Antony would spend hours walking among the citrus trees and the acacias. Imagine the sound of the wind in the palms, a dry, silken rustle that sounds like the earth whispering to itself. She. They would sit in a private grotto where a fountain carved in the shape of a lion's head poured water into a marble basin. The sound was a steady, hypnotic drone splash, pulse, flow that encouraged long silences and deep thoughts. They talked of many things. Cleopatra shared with Antony the history of her ancestors, the long line of Ptolemies who had looked at the Nile and seen a god. Antony shared with her the dreams of a man who had seen the whole world but found his home only in her presence. Their partnership was a bridge between the strength of the West and the wisdom of the East, a union that promised a new kind of world. In the great library, the scholars continued their work, their voices a low murmur in the background of their lives. The knowledge of the world was at their fingertips, and they used it to build a kingdom of beauty. They designed new gardens, built new temples, and fostered a culture where the arts and sciences were as important as the grain harvest. It was a golden interval, a time when the world felt balanced and whole. As the seasons turned, they took to the river. The Nile is the true soul of Egypt, and to travel its length is to travel through time. Imagine the royal barge once again, moving south toward the heart of the land. But this time, the journey was shared. The pace of the river is the pace of peace. There is no hurry on the Nile. The current moves with a heavy, deliberate purpose, and the barge follows its lead. They would sit on the deck under a canopy of purple silk, watching the landscape of Egypt pass by like a slow-motion painting. You see the farmers in the fields, their movements rhythmic and steady as they work the black soil. You see the children playing in the shallows, their laughter carrying over the water like the sound of small bells. You see the ancient temples rising from the dust: Karnak, Luxor, Thebes, their massive pylons looking like mountains carved by the hands of giants. At night, the barge would anchor in the middle of the stream. The water was so still, it became a perfect mirror for the stars. Cleopatra and Antony would lie on cushions, looking up at the sky, tracing the path of the planets. The air was cool and smelled of the river, a scent of damp earth, green reeds, and the ancient, eternal mystery of the water. In the silence of the night, the only sound was the rhythmic lapping of the Nile against the hull of the boat. Lap, lap, lap. It is a sound that has not changed in 10,000 years. It is a sound that reminds us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. In this partnership, Cleopatra found a different kind of strength, not the lonely strength of the exile, but the shared strength of a companion who understood the rhythm of her heart. During this time, the family grew. Cleopatra gave birth to twins, a boy named Alexander Helios and a girl named Cleopatra Selene. Later, another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, was born. Their names reflected the queen's connection to the heavens: Helios for the sun, Selene for the moon. Imagine the palace nursery again, but filled now with the energy of growing children. The rooms were airy and bright, the walls painted with scenes of the river and the stars. The children's laughter was a new music in the halls of the Ptolemies. Antony, the fierce Roman general, was a tender father. He would sit on the floor with the children, showing them his maps and telling them stories of distant lands. Cleopatra watched them with a quiet, glowing pride. She saw in her children the fulfillment of her dreamer, legacy that combined the best of both worlds. The atmosphere was one of profound domestic peace. The palace felt like a home, not just a seat of power. The servants moved with a lighter step, the scholars spoke with a more joyful tone, and the very stones of the palace seemed to glow with a softer light. It was a time of deep summer, when the fruit is ripe on the branch and the sun lingers long in the sky. The silver light of the moon, which is watched over the feasts of the inimitable livers and the quiet nurseries of the palace, now begins to cast longer, sharper shadows over the white stone of Alexandria. As you settle into the profound stillness of this night, imagine the air of Egypt growing heavy, not with heat, but with a silent, invisible weight. It is the weight of a world turning, the slow and inevitable movement of a great wheel that has begun its final, majestic rotation. We are drifting into the year 32 before the common era time of hushed thunder, where the storm is still far beyond the horizon, yet the birds have stopped their singing and the leaves of the acacia trees tremble without a breeze. In Rome, the young Octavian, the man who would one day be called Augustus, stands among the marble columns of the Senate. He is the opposite of the Nile. He is cold, precise, and as unyielding as the flint of a mountain. While Cleopatra and Antony have spent their years in the slow time of the East, Octavian has been weaving a web of words and laws. The tension between these two worlds, the world of the sun and the world of the iron, does not break with a sudden crash. Instead, it stretches, thin and taut, like a lute string being tightened in a silent room. Creak tension, silence. Imagine the atmosphere in the royal palace of Alexandria during these months. It is still a place of immense beauty, but the beauty has taken on a crystalline, fragile quality. The long corridors, once filled with the playful music of flutes, are now home to the soft, urgent footsteps of messengers. The scent of the Kifi incense still curls through the air, but it mingles now with the sharper, more metallic smell of the harbor, where the great galleys are being readied. The world is not ending. It is preparing. War, in its earliest stages, is a thing of the mind. It is fought with scrolls, with rumors, and with the steady, rhythmic pulse of propaganda. In Rome, Octavian speaks to the people, his voice a low and calculated drone. He does not speak of Antony as a general, but as a man lost in a dream of the East. He speaks of Cleopatra not as a queen, but as an enchantress who has woven a veil over the Roman spirit in Alexandria. Cleopatra hears these whispers as they arrive across the sea. She does not respond with anger. She responds with the calm, steady intelligence that has always been her shield. She sits in the great library, the shadows of the scrolls dancing on the walls in the flickering lamplight. She understands that the Rome she once visited, the Rome of Caesar, is gone. The new Rome is a place of mirrors and masks. The tension manifests in the quiet shifts of daily life. The markets of Alexandria are still full of life, but there is a new sobriety in the eyes of the merchants. The gold and purple silk of the royal barges is still brilliant, but the wood of the hulls is being reinforced. The city is like a person holding their breath, waiting for a sound that hasn't yet been made. Imagine the nights Antony and Cleopatra spend on the palace roof. The stars are as bright as ever, but they seem to be watching with a different kind of intensity. Antony no longer speaks of the past. He looks toward the north, his hand resting on the marble balustrade. The rhythmic lap of the sea against the palace walls. Lap, lap sounds, like the ticking of a cosmic clock. They are in the center of the storm's eye, a place of unnatural calm where the air is too still and the light is too bright. As the seasons move toward the year 30, the political shifts become more tangible, yet they remain distant, like a mountain range seen through a heat haze. The alliance between Antony and the Roman Senate is officially severed. The double crown of Egypt and the eagle of Rome are no longer in orbit around one another. They are on a collision course, yet, in the palace, life maintains a rhythmic, almost hypnotic regularity. Cleopatra oversees the grain harvests with even greater care, knowing that the strength of a kingdom lies in its bread. She walks through the fields at dusk, her white linen robes catching the last of the sun. The sound of the scythes in the wheat swish, swish. She's the sound of a land preparing to sustain itself. The children, Alexander, Helios, and Cleopatra Selene, are older now. They move through the palace with a quiet dignity, their tutors speaking to them in hushed tones about the history of their line. The nursery is gone, replaced by study rooms filled with maps of the world. The children are the living symbols of the future, yet the future is becoming a clouded mirror. Antony, too, has changed. The man of the inimitable livers has returned to the habits of the soldier, but with a new, somber grace. He spends his days at the docks, watching the construction of the massive quinquiremes. The sound of the hammers on the wood thud-thud. Thud-thud's a heartbeat of preparation. He is a man who knows that the slow time is coming to an end, and he is savoring the final drops of the Alexandrian sun. The banquets of this period are perhaps the most beautiful of all, for they are tinged with the knowledge of their own transience. Imagine a hall filled with the light of 1,000 candles, the flames perfectly still in the heavy, windless air. The tables are covered in the finest silver and glass, and the food is a masterpiece of Egyptian and Greek art figs, dipped in honey, roasted peacock with pomegranate seeds, and wine cooled with snow brought from the distant mountains. The conversation at these banquets is low and melodic. There is no talk of battle, no talk of blood. They talk of the philosophy of the soul, the eternity of the gods, and the beauty of the blue lotus. It is as if by focusing on the beautiful, they can keep the darkness at the gates. Cleopatra sits at the head of the table, her presence a steady, golden flame. She wears the jewels of her ancestors, the emeralds and pearls that have seen the rise and fall of dynasties. When the music plays the soft, liquid notes of the lyre and the gentle breath of the flute, it seems to float in the air, refusing to land, pluck, ring, drift. The guests move through the hall like ghosts in a dream, their shadows long and soft against the painted walls. This is the Alexandrian defiance, a refusal to let the approach of war dim the brilliance of the mind or the elegance of the spirit. Outside the hall, the night is silent. The great library stands in the darkness, a fortress of knowledge that has survived centuries. The Ferris lighthouse sweeps its beam across the water, a rhythmic, golden searchlight that looks for a foe that is still many leagues away. The world is a study in contrasts, the warmth of the banquet inside, and the cool, waiting darkness of the sea outside. The transition toward the conflict moves from the palace to the sea. The court of Cleopatra and Antony begins to travel, moving through the islands of the Aegean like a floating city. They move to Ephesus, then to Samos. Imagine the sight of hundreds of ship's galleys, transport vessels, and royal barges moving together across the indigo water. The sound of the fleet is a low, constant hum, the creaking of thousands of timbers, the snap of the purple sails in the wind, and the rhythmic chant of the rowers. It is a world of water and wood. Cleopatra is always at the center, her golden galley a point of light in the vastness of the fleet. Life on Samos is a continuation of the Alexandrian dream, but it is surreal, suspended in time. The island is filled with artists, actors, and musicians who have followed the queen. There are festivals every night, and the air is filled with the scent of wild herbs and sea salt. It is a festival at the edge of the world. Antony and Cleopatra walk along the rocky shores of the island. The waves crashing softly against the stones, hiss, crash, sigh. They are surrounded by the elite of the East kings and princes who have pledged their support to the queen. But in the quiet moments, they are just two people looking at the horizon. They know that Octavian is gathering his own fleet in the west. They know that the two halves of the world are drawing closer. Like the jaws of a great leviathan, thus the year 31 begins. The fleet moves toward Actium, a promontory on the western coast of Greece. Here, the atmosphere changes once again. The slow time has become a still time. The fleet is anchored in the calm waters of the Ambracian Gulf, a natural harbor surrounded by low green hills. Imagine the stillness of this gulf. The water is so flat it looks like a sheet of lead. The ships sit motionless, their reflections perfect and unmoving in the surface. The heat of the Greek summer is heavy and humid, pressing down on the camps of the soldiers and the decks of the galleys. Cleopatra stays on her ship. Her cabin is a sanctuary of cool linen and shaded light. She spends her days reading and her nights watching the campfires of the Roman army on the opposite shore. The fires are like fallen stars, thousands of tiny points of orange light that flicker in the dark. They are the only sign that the enemy is there. The approach of war is not a sudden event here. It is a slow accumulation of days. There are minor skirmishes, distant movements of troops, and the constant, rhythmic work of the foragers. But the great clash remains a shadow in the distance. The tension has become so thick it is almost tangible, like the humidity in the air before a thunderstorm. The sun that once blazed with a fierce, golden pride over the harbors of Alexandria is now dipping toward the horizon, its light softening into a bruised and beautiful purple. As you settle into the quiet of this night, imagine the air of Egypt not as a heat, but as a cool, velvet shroud that wraps around the white limestone of the palaces. We are entering the year 30 before the common Eru, the final, long-shadowed hour of a story that has spanned the breadth of the world. There is no shouting here, no clash of iron. There is only the rhythmic, steady pulse of the tide and the soft, echoing silence of a kingdom that is preparing to breathe its last, long exhale in the wake of the battle at Actium. The world has become a smaller, more intimate place. The vast fleets and the thousands of legions have faded into the background, leaving only two people in a palace of high arches and cooling stone. Cleopatra and Mark Antony have returned to their city, but the Alexandria they find is not the one they left. It is a city of hushed memories, a place where the wind through the papyrus columns seems to whisper of the greatness that was. Rather than the power that is, imagine the atmosphere of the palace in these final months. It is a world of deep, liquid shadows and the persistent, earthy scent of the Nile. The great library still stands, its scrolls holding the wisdom of 1,000 years. But the scholars move through the halls with a slow, heavy step. The light of the oil lamps is dimmed, casting long, dancing shapes against the walls. It is a time of profound reflection, a season where the soul turns inward, looking for a peace that the world of men can no longer provide. Mark Antony, the man of iron and thunder, has become a creature of the shadows. Imagine him walking through the palace gardens at midnight, his Roman armor replaced by a simple linen robe. He is a man who has seen his world dissolve like salt in water. The legions that once followed his every word have drifted away into the mists of the north, leaving him with only the rhythm of his own heartbeat and the presence of the queen. His downfall is not a sudden crash, but a slow, rhythmic subsiding, like the water of the Nile receding after a great flood. He spends his days in a small house he built on a jetty in the harbour, calling it the Timonium, after the misanthrope Timon here. Surrounded by the sea on three sides, he listens to the constant, hypnotic lap of the waves against the stone. Lap, lap, lap. It is a sound that speaks of the indifference of the universe to the ambitions of Kings. Cleopatra visits him there, her presence a steady, golden light in the dimness of his retreat. She does not come with reproaches. She comes with the quiet wisdom of the desert. She brings him honeyed wine and the soft music of the lyre, creating a sanctuary of the senses where the cold reality of Octavian's approach cannot reach. In the quiet of the Timonium, they find a new kind of partnership, not one of power, but one of shared solitude. They are two stars that have fallen from the sky, resting together in the dark water before the morning comes, while Antony retreats to the sea. Cleopatra looks toward the earth. She has ordered the construction of a magnificent tomb near the temple of Assessa, structure of white marble and gold that rises toward the heavens. Imagine the sound of the mason's chisels in the quiet afternoon, clink, clink, clinkly rhythmic, steady work that marks the passage of the final days. The tomb is not a place of darkness. It is a treasury. She fills the chambers with the riches of her life, the emeralds of the Ptolemies, the pearls of the Red Sea, the fine silks of the East, and the precious scrolls of the library. It is as if she is gathering the soul of Egypt into a single point of light. The air inside the tomb is cool and smells of cedar wood and frankincense. It is a place of absolute order and beauty, a final sanctuary where the queen can remain the master of her own destiny. In the evenings, she sits on the roof of the tomb, watching the sun set over the great sea. The water is a dark, churning indigo, reflecting the first stars of the night. She thinks of her father, the flute player, and her ancestors who built this city from the dust. She feels the weight of the double crown, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels like a part of her, as natural as the skin on her hands, or the breath in her lungs. She is the daughter of Isis, and she knows that the end of one cycle is simply the beginning of another. The news of Octavian's advance arrives in the palace like a series of soft, distant ripples. He has taken Pelusium. He is at the gates of the city. But in the royal quarter, the atmosphere remains one of dreamlike defiance. Cleopatra orders one last banquet for the inimitable livers. Imagine the scene. The table is set with the same elegance as in the years of their greatest power. The candles are lit, the wine is poured, and the scent of the blue lotus fills the air. But the tone is different. It is a banquet of the soul. They do not talk of the enemy. They talk of the beauty of the world they have known. They talk of the scent of the desert after a rain, the way the light hits the pyramids at dawn, and the sound of the children's laughter in the palace gardens. Antony finds his strength again in this final hour. He is no longer the defeated general. He is the companion of the queen, They drink to the good life, to the moments of clarity and joy that no army can take away. The music of the flutes is soft and melodic, a long, slow song that seems to hang in the air like the scent of incense. When the dawn finally breaks over the city, it brings with it the finality of the Roman arrival. The transition of the city is quiet. The guards lay down their spears, and the gates are opened. There is no sacking of the city, no fire in the streets. Octavian wants Alexandria whole. He wants the queen as his prize. But Cleopatra has spent her life outsmarting the world, and she is not finished yet. The moment of Antony's passing is a scene of profound, heartbreaking quietude. Wounded and weary, he is brought to the queen at her tomb. Because the doors are sealed, she and her handmaidens, Iras and Charmian, use ropes to pull him up to the high window. Imagine the effort, the rhythmic, heavy breathing, the straining of the silk cords, the soft murmurs of encouragement inside the chamber. The light is filtered and golden. Cleopatra holds him in her arms, her tears falling silently onto his Roman cloak. In this final meeting, the politics of empires are forgotten. There is only the breaths, low, ragged, and then finally, as still as the stone of the pyramids. Antony passes away in the heart of the East he loved so much, his final sight being the face of the woman who was his world. The silence that follows is absolute. Cleopatra sits with him for a long time, her hand resting on his brow. The sound of the wind outside is a low, constant sigh, moving through the temple pylons and the palm trees. She feels a sense of completion. The Roman lion has found his rest, and now the Egyptian sun must find its own path to the horizon in the days that follow. Cleopatra remains in her tomb, a prisoner of her own design. Octavian sends his messengers to her, men who speak in the clipped, cold tones of the new order. They promise her safety, they promise her mercy, but she hears the clink of the chains beneath their words. She knows that they intend to lead her through the streets of Rome in a golden cage, a trophy for a triumph. She spends her time in prayer and reflection. She bathes in water scented with rose petals and dresses in her most royal robes, the linen of the finest weave, the gold collar of the pharaohs, and the crown of the cobra. She is preparing for a journey that no Roman can follow. Imagine her in the quiet of the tomb, the only light coming from a high window that tracks the passage of the stars. She looks at the treasures she has gathered, the symbols of her life and her land. She feels a deep, abiding connection to the soil of Egypt. She is not leaving her kingdom. She is becoming a part of it. Iras and Charmian move silently around her, their presence a comfort that requires no words. They have been with her since her youth, through the library and the desert, through Rome and the river. They are the final witnesses to a life that has been lived with a brilliance that will never be repeated. The air in the tomb is still and heavy, like the air in a sanctuary before the priest enters. The end arrives with a simple gifter basket of figs, brought by a peasant from the countryside. The Roman guards at the door look at the fruit, their eyes grazing over the green leaves and the plump, purple skins. They do not see the small, rhythmic movement beneath the leaves. They do not see the sacred messenger of the goddess Asp. The cobra of the sun. Cleopatra receives the basket with a soft smile. Imagine her sitting on her golden throne within the tomb, the basket resting on a table of citrus wood. The scent of the figs is sweet and earthy, a final gift from the black soil of the Nile. She dismisses her guards and remains only with her loyal handmaidens. The transition is a quiet, deliberate act of grace. She reaches into the basket, her hand moving with the same steady, unhurried rhythm that has guided her entire life. She welcomes the bite as a key that unlocks the final door. There is no pain, only a spreading coolness, a sensation like the shadows of the palace at twilight. The golden lamps of the palace have finally burned to their last flicker of amber light, and the great harbour of Alexandria rests in a silence so profound it seems to hold the breath of the entire world. As you settle into the deepest part of your rest, imagine the air of Egypt as a cooling, silver mist that drifts from the banks of the Nile over the white limestone of the temples, and out toward the infinite, dark mirror of the sea. We have reached the final chapter of our journey, the time after the Queen, the era of memory, and the slow, eternal weaving of her life into the tapestry of the stars. There is no more urgency, no more weight of crowns or the iron of Rome. There is only the legacy, a soft and persistent music that remains after the flutes have gone still. It is the year 30 before the Common Era, and the sun has set on the line of the Ptolemies. But as the physical world changes, as the Roman governors move into the halls of the palace and the legions march through the streets of Alexandria, the soul of the land remains untouched. The Nile does not change its course because a new name is written on the scrolls of the tax collectors. The river continues to rise with the melting snows of the distant mountains, bringing the rich black silt to the fields of the delta, the rhythm of the land flood. Plant, harvest, rest is a heartbeat that Cleopatra understood better than any other, and it is a heartbeat that continues to pulse beneath the new Roman order. Imagine Egypt in the months following the Queen's passing. The atmosphere is one of solemn peace. Octavian has become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and Egypt has become his private garden. But to the farmers in the fields and the priests in the temples of Upper Egypt, the Queen is not gone. She has simply transitioned from the world of stone to the world of spirit in the temples of Dendora and Philae. The carvings of Cleopatra as the goddess Isis remain. The stone does not forget the touch of the Queen who spoke the language of the people. Imagine a priest moving through the high, shadowed columns of a temple at dusk. The scent of incense and cinnamons still hangs in the air, a thick and comforting fragrance. He touches the relief of the Queen's face, and in the coolness of the granite, he feels the continuity of his culture. Rome may bring its laws and its roads, but the spirit of Egypt is written in the hieroglyphs, a language that Cleopatra mastered and preserved. The city of Alexandria, too, remains a jewel of the Mediterranean. The great library continues to house the thoughts of humanity, its scrolls resting in the dry, cedar-scented silence. The scholars still walk the shaded porticos. Their voices a low, melodic murmur as they discuss the geometry of the universe. Cleopatra's legacy is not found in the battles she fought, but in the environment of intellect she fostered. She made her city the center of the human mind, a place where the light of reason burned as brightly as the fire atop the Pharos. As the decades turn into centuries, the memory of Cleopatra begins to undergo a slow, rhythmic transformation. To the Romans who followed Augustus, she was a figure of mystery and formidable power, woman who had challenged the greatest generals of their age with nothing but the strength of her intellect and the grace of her presence. They wrote about her with a mixture of fear and awe, their words creating the first layers of the legend that would travel across the world. But beneath the Roman stories, there was the Egyptian truth. In the villages along the Nile, the story of the queen who loved the river was passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son. It was told in the quiet hours of the night, when the only light was the glow of a small fire and the only sound was the rustle of the papyrus reeds. She She, in these stories, she was not a political figure. She was a protector of the light, a woman who had stood between the ancient world and the rising tide of the West. Imagine the name Cleopatra floating through history, like a seed on the wind. It takes root in the minds of poets in Persia, scholars in Baghdad, and storytellers in the courts of Europe. Each culture adds its own color to her story, its own texture to her robes. She becomes a symbol of the eternal feminine, the embodiment of a wisdom that is both earthly and divine. But at the center of all these stories is the same woman we have followed, the student of the library, the daughter of the Nile, and the master of the slow time. As we move forward through the long centuries, imagine the sands of the desert slowly and gently covering the physical traces of her life. The palace of the Ptolemies, with its marble floors and its bronze fountains, eventually sinks beneath the rising waters of the harbor, preserved in the cool, dark silence of the sea. The tomb of white marble is hidden by the shifting dunes, its treasures resting in a sanctuary of absolute stillness. This hiding of her physical world was a gift of time. It allowed the legend to grow without the distraction of the mundane. For nearly 2,000 years, Cleopatra existed only in the mind and the heart of the world. She became a dream of the East, a golden shadow that appeared in the plays of Shakespeare and the paintings of the Renaissance. The world forgot the details of her tax codes and her grain shipments, but it never forgot the rhythm of her grace. In the late 20th and 21st centuries, the world began to look for her again. Divers descended into the quiet turquoise waters of the Alexandrian harbor, finding the statues of her gods and the columns of her palace resting on the seabed, covered in a soft velvet of silt and sea moss. These artifacts emerged from the deep like memories returning to the surface of the mind. They were cool to the touch, smoothed by 2 millennia of water, a tangible link to a woman who had once watched the moon from these very stones. What is the true legacy of Cleopatra? It is not the gold she left in her tomb, nor the territory she briefly regained. It is the realization that intelligence is a form of beauty, and that leadership is a form of stewardship. She taught the world that a ruler should be a scholar, and that a kingdom is defined by its culture as much as its borders. Imagine the Cleopatra effect on the human spirit. She is the reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one can maintain a sense of internal order and grace. She showed us that the slow time, the time spent in the library, the time spent watching the river, the time spent in deep conversation is the most valuable time of all. Her life was a long, slow meditation on what it means to be a human being at the center of history. As you drift closer to sleep, think of her as a guide for the mind. She represents the ability to speak many languages, to understand many perspectives, and to remain calm in the eye of the storm. Her legacy is the great library that exists in the heart of every person who seeks knowledge. Her legacy is the steady, rhythmic pulse of the Nile that exists in every person who finds peace in the natural world. Egypt today is a land of layers, a place where the modern world sits atop a foundation of infinite antiquity. To walk through the streets of Alexandria at night is still to experience the atmosphere that Cleopatra loved. The salt breeze still blows in from the Mediterranean, cooling the white buildings. The scent of the blue lotus is gone, replaced by the smell of coffee and sea spray. But the feeling of the city remains the same, a city of light, of layers, and of a deep, watery intelligence. The Nile still flows past the ruins of the temples, a dark and powerful presence that carries the weight of history toward the sea. If you stand on the banks of the river at midnight, You can still hear the sound of the reeds swaying in the breeze. Hush, hush, hush. It is the same sound that Cleopatra heard. It is the same rhythm that guided the construction of the pyramids and the writing of the first scrolls. The land does not forget. The stars above Egypt are the same stars that Cleopatra tracked from her palace roof. Orion still strides across the sky, and Sirius still signals the turn of the seasons. There is a profound comfort in this constancy. It reminds us that our stories are part of a much larger narrative, a cosmic song that has been singing since the beginning of time. Cleopatra was a verse in that song, and her melody continues to vibrate in the air of the world. We are coming to the end of our journey through the sands and the stars. The story of Cleopatra has moved from the golden halls of her birth to the quiet sanctuary of her legacy. It is a story that ends not with a conclusion, but with a transition of fading of the physical into the eternal. Imagine the queen now, not as a ruler in a palace, but as a presence in the quiet moments of your own life. She is in the stillness of a room filled with books. She is in the calm of a garden at twilight. She is in the steady, rhythmic breathing that precedes a deep and restorative sleep. She has become the patron goddess of the quiet mind, a symbol of a soul that has found its home in the harmony of the universe. The history of the world is like the Nile. It is vast. It is deep, and it is always moving. We are all travelers on that river, drifting through the landscapes of time. Cleopatra was a traveler who knew how to navigate the currents with grace. She knew when to row, when to sail, and when to simply let the water carry her. As you drift tonight, let the river of sleep carry you in the same way. You are safe. You are supported. You are part of the flow.